Today, I'm going to talk about dependencies, which it's quite interesting, at least for me. I've been talking about dependencies, how to resolve it, but this is more about how we decide which dependencies we should use and which shouldn't. And most of you already know me, but this is the new part. On top, I'm just joined the OpenSSF, the City Foundation, the CNCF. So I'm doing more of that stuff, even more than before. And I always like to start my presentations by reminding people that I'm a developer, and that's actually my world, my entire world. We do this all the time. I do this for work, I do this in my free time. This is the thing that actually keeps me going. And this is something I really like to do. It's share knowledge. Go and speak with developers online or face-to-face. I do prefer more face-to-face. And there is a huge and long story behind this race. But I will only give you the short part. When people ask me, what do you do? I'm just a human writing code for humans to improve human life. It's because, yes, we write code for machines, but the first consumer, it's a human. We spend more time reading other people's code than writing our own. And most of the time, we join a project, and all the code from that project is something that we haven't even decided that it should be there. So we depend on the goodwill of previous developers. I choose the right naming convention. Please document whatever you do. Do that, because you are going to be on the other side at some point. So today, dependencies is a key part of our software development. I mean, thankfully enough, the not done here or not written here syndrome, it's part of our story, history. Now, we do use a lot of dependencies as building blocks. We actually go into big repositories and pick and choose different libraries. Sometimes we have more than one version, more than one author of said versions. And dependencies, we use them in development and runtime and test. So we already know that some of them will have key parts in different stages of our software development cycle. But not all dependencies are the same. So I'm going to give you two statements, just two. This is not so interactive. And you will see that dependencies are collections containing high-quality tested code that provides functionality that requires significant expertise to develop. That's true. But this is also a very true statement. Dependency managers like NPM have made possible that trivial functionality can be packaged and published. So I have two sides of the spectrum, really well-tested code that does marvelous things. There's a lot of, some people say, magic inside the frameworks, and I have one-liners modules coming from other type of developers. And that's true. Both are dependencies that we may be consuming and using. So what are the different types of dependencies? We have from the resources, like non-binaries. Sometimes our CSS, our themes, whatever our application, for example, if we're developing single page applications, there may be even images, text that is going through its own process to validate or to update. And then from there, modules, package, libraries, and frameworks. Most of the programming languages have the same concepts. Others, for example, JavaScript will treat packages in a single directory with a description file saying what it's doing and how to include it or not. So we roughly have this separation between types. And from modules to frameworks or platforms, we have what actually the distinction between them is usually the functionality that they provide. If you move towards frameworks and platforms, maybe the lines of code or the size of the project, it's bigger. Opinionated. Frameworks and platforms versus libraries tend to be more opinionated. And in the JavaScript world, you will notice that the integration between functional components is tighter if it's provided by the framework. If it's only a library, they are loosely coupled, and sometimes they don't even integrate that nicely. If you're working with frameworks of platforms, you will have better roadmaps, versioning, licensing, and tests. And this is an example that I use a lot in the JavaScript world. Angular, for example, it's a framework. And React, its name itself as a library. So they are already preparing consumers with some of the ideas about, like, Angular will provide the store and the different ways of, like, the hubs and the process and the testing, all the components that are actually make them work or decide to be well supported, while React is defined only as a library. So they provide more integration with different other libraries for different other functionalities, and that's it. They say, well, we are opinionated, but not that opinionated. And as I said before, for example, this is a curation of NPM packages that are defined as micro, and literally there are one line of code, of actual functional code, because for creating an NPM module, you require more files. But the functionality that they provide is usually one line of code. So we have a spectrum of dependencies. And your first question should be, well, it's great, Ixchel. Now I know which one is a module, which is a package, and which is a framework. And, well, the point here is that I want you to realize or have a step back and say, I have several tons or several different numbers of dependencies in my project. Some of them may be only cosmetics. Some maybe I depend only on one or two frameworks. And most of my libraries are in the middle. Like, they provide really cool functionality, and I do depend on them. My level of dependency is high. And why I'm asking those questions, or why do I want you to have a step back and consider this? Because every single license that you include in your project will need to be updated, migrated, or clean up if you decided to remove it. So every single one of these activities will have an impact, and you will have to allocate some of your budget, either time, test, or costs, like really paying somebody to do that. So what can possibly go wrong with dependencies? Out of what? Out of the, we will go into the bad news about dependencies in just a second. But yes, support. Well, the first thing that you have to know is that you're adding code into your particular project that you haven't written. So I put this with even quotes because this is a very dark view on open source, and I support open source. So I'm the first one saying we benefit a lot from open source. So the fact that I'm changing or I'm painting with a dark color the unknown programmer seems unfair. But on the other hand, it's true. I don't know all the open source maintainers of the dependencies that I work with. That's true. I trust them. And I like to trust them, and I know a lot of open source developers, and I married one, so it's okay. And the fact that we don't know the quality, or the fact that we don't know a lot of things about our dependencies is not only in open source, it's also in closed source. In this case, I'm going to focus in open source, And I'm going to pick NPM packages. I know I'm being cruel because they have so much troubles in their lives. So for example, I'm going to just go through 6 or 7 of the most noticeable in the last decade or two. So leftpad, who remembers leftpad and what happened? Yes. So let me tell you that story because it's quite interesting. At that point, NPM registry, you can register your packages with the name that you wanted. That they didn't care. With the authors could pick a name. So there was this really prolific author that had so many projects in NPM registry. And a company came in and said, oh, I cannot use my company name to publish my package. And NPM said, well, maybe that's your name. I mean, you are the company, you should be able to use it. So NPM, the people behind NPM registry said, okay, we are going to unpublish or give you that name. The author of that particular module got mad and he said, you're not, like, how come this is happening? And so he decided to unregister or unlist all his other projects. And one of them was leftpad. So for 3 hours, only 3 hours, he effectively almost broke the construction of the building of all SPA packages around the world because leftpad was quite useful. And what did leftpad did? Only adding padding. That's it. It only added padding. After this, actually, NPM decided to change the rules of how do you register NPM packages and how you unregister NPM packages. Other notable ones was there was a version of NPM, the actual executable, that breaks your machines because they made a mistake about what the folder they were going to install and change the rights, the Linux rights. So they break the machines. There has been a lot of payload that steals Bitcoin. Most recently in Colors at the beginning of this year, in 2022, Colors actually broke the code, like they broke the contract, and they started the official author, actually the maintainer, decided to update the latest version, remove the functionality, and start printing in a infinite loop something about Aaron Swartz, kind of activism. The latest, it was almost similar. They created a peace not to war package that only published in the console, like a long test saying, I don't believe in war, we support peace, etc., etc. And that was okay. But what happened is Node IPC started to install peace not war package indiscriminately in the machines. And that actually, well, again, took control of several machines, and that was quite the problem. So we don't control the different versions. We don't control how authors behaved, because in the case of Colors and in the case of Peace Not War, well, they were not doing something against the functionality. They were not breaking the contract, but they were adding, in some cases, more information than required, or doing something, or were being used to break code. For Java developers, there is a really nice session that I totally recommend you. It is for Mark Hoffman, the author of Jconf. So he is talking about how do we should, or how is the best way to upgrade the dependencies on Java. And he works in a very critical system. So changing Java versions without a plan, a roadmap about when to do the upgrade, how much time do we have to have for doing the testing, how do we decide if that is the specific version that we require or not. So he has this session and it's quite good. I totally recommend it to you. The other thing that I wanted to recommend you here is that if it's about security, about how our dependencies are in a way secure, please use more tools. In this case, obviously, I'm going to promote X-Ray. If you don't want to use X-Ray, and I will show you why you can start using it right now without paying a single dollar, you can also use the OWASP dependency track. And what is this is also has a really nice integration between different languages, for example, Python, JavaScript, NPM support, Java, and different others. So to check through the software bill of materials if your dependencies have any problems. As you know, with the new executive order, the 14028, we do need to pay more attention about the software bill of materials. So this is an open source and totally open to the community, created and developed by the community to check specifically that. If you are writing software, like open source software, the OSSF also has a best practice. We just published this best practice guide. It's only one page. We actually spent a lot of time discussing what should go in this particular consist guide. And we go through what all open source projects should have to be more secure. The other one, if you all also have your own open source projects, it will be really nice that you run the scorecard. This, you can actually configure a GitHub action, and it will run a series of heuristics and metrics. And it will serve two purposes. It will provide you with a report saying, how do you score in each of one of the divisions that the scorecard is checking, and also get all the statistics back into the Linux Foundation, into the Open Source Security Foundation. So with that, we get more information about the state of affairs in terms of open source. The other one, and this is the same one, but it should be another one. We have two guides in the Open Source Security Foundation. One is for people that produce open source, and the other one is just for people that consume open source. So there is a guide with different number of things that you should care if you're consuming open source. And here it comes where people to your contribution about what can possibly go wrong. There is another article that I totally recommend you to have a look, is this Surviving Software Dependencies. This is from 2019. And the first edition was he published in 2018, and it's quite nice about what you should care. Most of the considerations that we are going to discuss really fast right now, they are already automatically tested on scorecards, for example. But I wanted to have this time to explain you what are the questions in a more philosophical way. So Alex, the first thing that he says is that the cost of adopting a bad dependencies is the sum of all the cost multiplied by the probability of something wrong happening, and that is the expected cost of a bad dependency. So he says, we do need to expect the dependencies to have a gut feeling, how good, how bad they are. First thing that we have to check, is there a clear design in the API? Do we have mirror functions? Like if you have a call for add, is there a call for delete? Sometimes it is surprising the amount of APIs that do not have this kind of functionality. The code quality. Think that you're using a very critical dependency in your project. It's Friday, you need to do the release. There is a bug in that particular library. You have isolated it. Now you have to either communicate with the authors and wait for a patch, a workaround, or go you inside, fork it, and solve the issue. So if that is your last resource, do you like the code that you're going to dive in that weekend? That's a good question. So if your critical dependency has a spaghetti code, maybe you should shop around for a different one if you can. Do they have tests? Can you run them? When was the last time that you run the test of a dependency, of a critical dependency? I'm not talking about doing this for every single dependency. Please don't do that. But for your critical ones, maybe it is a good idea. Bug fixing. Do they have an issue tracking? How often do they check the issue tracker? Do they open and close them in timely manner, whatever we define as timely manner? How long has it been maintained? How many people work on the package? And a word of advice here. I'm not going to say that if there is only one maintainer, you shouldn't use that specific library. Because again, it all depends. On what? On the commitment of the specific author, or the time that he or she has put into a specific project. And this is something that I like to talk to people. Like, we consume a lot of open source code. The last report about security that I was reading, most of the software out there has 80% of open source code in their DNA. So we depend on it quite deeply. So how much are we as software developers contributing back to open source, to the projects that we use? So for example, if you notice that there is a really cool library that you're using, but has few contributors, maybe this is a good moment to think about contributing back to open source. How many people or how many projects are using this particular library? I'm not saying this because you should develop like in a popularity contest. Don't. I hate when people say, I'm going to use this Envoy because Netflix is using it. Well, that's perfect. That's perfect for Netflix. That's perfect for Envoy. But the reasons why you're using a specific library shouldn't be like a popularity contest. So, but it's important in terms of, is there enough information? Is there enough information in the forums to help you navigate any problem that you have, either with the documentation, either with execution, or any problem that you may encounter while using it. Security. Do they even, at some point, sanitize their inputs? If they are like taking some inputs, do they like, what is the proper way of they handling your inputs and their outputs? Do they have any security problems listed? And I'm not saying, again, to steer away from them. No, it's just to notice what is the way, how do they react? Do they know they have to publish? Do they know they have to let the users know in case of any vulnerability discovered? What is their way of working and reacting? Do they even, do they run any kind of heuristics on their software? That's always good to know. Licensing. Do they have a defined license? Does that even match with your organization? And these considerations can go on and on and on because we have transient dependencies. So all this part of the session was to think about three different concepts. What are the different types of dependencies that I have in my project? The cosmetic ones may be interesting to have them in mind because if they're very costly in terms of maintaining or upgrading or removing, maybe you want to have a double look about like, do I really need this cosmetic dependency? Do I really want to depend on something like left batch in the future? Yes or no? For the critical ones, is to at least know what are the critical ones and if we are taking the right decisions about the quality of the dependencies that we're choosing there. Because these three coordinates will tell you how costly they are or they are not. And of course, I work for JFrog and we are behind Artifactory. So that's why we take dependencies so seriously. One of the things that we have been taking seriously for far too long is security. And with the scandals in our industry that I won't go into them, but you know, we have had several ones. Every single company, Sneak, Sonatype, we did it. We push tools out there to fix dependencies, to react as fast as possible, to give more information to developers as fast as possible. And as I said, I want to talk about three different tools coming from JFrog that you don't need to pay anything to use them. So I urge you to use them right away. The first one is Frogbot. And I think most here knows what Dependabot does. Fair to say? Yes. Frogbot, it's similar. When it detects a version with a specific security issue, will generate you a report and tell you, well, this is the severity, this is the package, this is the fixed version, and this are the components affected. Every single time that there is a pull request and you have configured your GitHub action, this kind of report will be generated. And if you go ahead and merge the pull request, even the Frogbot will try to fix it. It will still scan your dependence or your build or your POM in this case, your POM or your Gradle file, your Gradle build file. It doesn't matter. We support several ones. And will tell you, well, this is a pull request to fix this particular dependency. Why I like this one more than Dependabot? Okay, so DevSecOps shift left. Management was happy. They say, this is the way to go. We are going to ship faster. We are going to ship more securely. This is like the future. And suddenly, us as developers, we had to manage more security tools. We have to manage observability, tracing, logging, distributed. Now we have to create our own Docker images. We have, like, our job description duplicated from one day to another. And that was interesting, to say the very least. Something happened similar in the security arena. If you run several, like for example, the pet clinic application, and you run the security analysis of some of the applications out there, you will find like hundreds of warnings or security advices between high, critical, or just warnings. So this is what I like the most. Here, if you have your own free instance of JFrog, you can create a watch. You can create a specific policy and say, these are the only vulnerabilities, or these are the only things that I'm going to worry. And these watches can be plugged into this particular reports. So what does that mean? Means that you have a clear policy of how to address security vulnerabilities, at the time of you are creating pull requests or you are updating your GitHub projects or GitLab projects or big bucket ones. So it's not only reacting to everything, but it's reacting and giving you options that can be more timely for your organization or even in your own practices. The same idea, you have your free tier. In the latest version, well, this is not the latest version, but it's fairly recent that Docker Desktop now supports extensions. And there's a lot of companies that have created their own extensions for the Docker images. In this case, you're only seeing how the JFrog extension is actually scanning a Docker image, and it will have the same information: the vulnerability, the number, the version that it has been improved, etc., etc. And also can work with the specific watches. So you don't need to get 43 different vulnerabilities in Alpine. You can focus in the ones that actually matters to your organization for whatever reason. I'm not saying the 43 31 4 critical and 31 high are not important enough. I'm just saying filtering through a policy way may be better for you as a developer. And finally, with the same free tier, you can add a plugin into IDEA. And again, as soon as you are coding, it will actually show you the same report at that point. And well, obviously, let's go to see them in practice, obviously. But first, I wanted to show you again.
Do you have any QA session? Do you have a QA question and answer session at the end?
Yes. So, yeah, sure. Okay, so these are the projects that I was telling you about. OWASP for dependency track. You can check the features and the integrations with all the different ecosystems that they support and what they're doing, the integrations. Please use it, how to install it, quite nicely. Scorecards, and it will actually create you different kind of badges, not these ones, but it will create other badges. This is, as mentioned before, the best practice for OS developers in evaluating open source software. So you have the new guides and the Frogbot. For the Frogbot, if you go back into the GitHub repository, how do you install it? As well, we support this package management tools. And what you need only is create the JFrog free tier that you only require your username, your email, and that's it. Verify your email address, and that is it. You keep it for as long as you want. There is no trial. And then you go into the different GitHub repositories, you create the environment, use the secrets, and this is the most complicated part, which is copy the templates, and that's it. You add this as a workflow in your GitHub actions, and that is it. And IDEA, let me see if I have open IDEA. Preferences. Yep. So once you install in order setting your preference, your JFrog global configuration, it's again your particular platform URL, your user and password. For the password, you can have the encrypted and with different format password, and that's it. You have your JFrog X-ray URL or an Artifactory, and you will be checking exactly what you saw in the Frogbot report, but here in the same way. And let me see if I have my Docker desktop. And while we wait, probably, eventually, at some point. So in my settings, again, my URL with the password, and this is what I talked about. You can create your own watches that are defined in your tier, your instance, and use them to scan any Docker image. So for me, as I said, use the Pandabot, use the audit of a Sneak, use the audit of JFrog, use whatever you want to use, but run them, please, in your projects. I particularly like mine, not because they pay my check, obviously, but I particularly like it because it provides a lot of flexibility into defining what. Because every single time that management pushes towards my direction new responsibilities, I always ask, like, what is the direction? What do you want me to pay attention? Because not everything can be high priority. If everything is high priority, then nothing is high priority. So tell me what, where, how, when. And this tool allows you what easily. So I have clear answers and clear questions for later on. So that's why that I wanted to bring you these tools. And as I said, nothing to pay here. So is there any question that I can answer? Do you want to see the full demo? What time is it? Did I speak too fast, too slow? Okay. But we can. So, yes.
I want to understand this sonar type versus this X-ray. Do we really need to have the sonar type like an XSIQ and X-ray both? Like the sonar cube, the sonar type is already scanning that all artifacts and it is giving the report. What is the real benefit I will get if I go to the Jconf?
Okay, first, if you are using, for example, in your own GitHub project, your own personal project, let's say it like that. So when you are defining your POM, you specify whatever version you want there. And of course, if you are going to maybe Central and checking what is the version, and you actually go into the copy code, you can see what CVEs are listed there with the number of vulnerabilities. But if you're not doing that, if you're not going to Maven Central to check the version of the library, then for you it's only an entry in your POM file. And an entry in your POM file is an entry in your POM file. It's just text. The vulnerability will be apparent until you are publishing your own version, because publishing your own version will happen and then it will run the security advisories. But Frogbot, what it's doing if you're using GitLab or GitHub, is in every single pull request, even before you generate any version of your code. So this is like the idea of pushing left.
Sonar Cube runs in the build, but X-ray will run when you check in.
Yes, as long as you do the pull request, the Frogbot. If you are running your plugin in IDEA,
Sonar Cube does that, but it won't do and read the file and do that. It will only do when you run the image.
No, this is right now you hear your machine.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
My question was about like a not sonar cube. Sonar cube is the code quality. I'm talking about like a sonar type. There is a tool called XSIQ, where we are scanning all vulnerabilities.
Sonnet I live, yes.
Yeah. And X-ray is also doing the similar job. Like it is on the Docker images. But what is the real benefit?
The watches.
XSIQ versus this X-ray.
Well, if you're already using our tools like Artifactory and etc., then it's the watches. that functionality of you defining what triggers, what is the severity level that you're focusing, and some of the functionality about like if you encounter this particular violation of a specific watches or policy, you can do something. In Artifactory, what you can do is don't serve this dependency anymore. Rewrite that dependency. You ask me for version 3 and I will say no. Then if you ask me in a specific repository, I will tell you maybe you're looking for 5. If you are, and this is all the functionality that Artifactory allows you. We redefine the policies, we can redefine the version, or we can allow the serving of a particular dependency. This is not X-ray. X-ray will only tell you there's a problem here. Artifactory with all the triggers and extra information and all the other functionality can solve different issues.
I understand the Artifactory versus the X-ray.
Yes.
But my question is that X-ray is also doing the vulnerability scanning.
Yes.
The Docker images.
Yes.
Like we have a Nexus IQ.
Yes.
That is also doing the similar scanning.
Yes.
I want to understand the advantage one over the other, which is the real identified vision on this Kubernetes.
In terms of the number of vulnerabilities that you find, the standards, the CVE, we both will find it. That's not like that, that's super similar. What we are providing more is sometimes we generate reports like specifying how difficult is this particular vulnerability to be exploited. That's our security teams. Those are like reports for our clients. That's not standard. The second thing is the watches, the policies. That's also non-standard. So in terms of finding, I hope both are finding the same thing. What do you do with that? It's quite different. Yes.
I want to understand what is the advantages one over the other, like especially in the Kubernetes, in the traditional, like a non-Kubernetes, like a non-Docker world. Yeah, maybe Sonar type tool like a Nexus IQ is okay, but if you are going on this Docker world, like a container world, I think X-ray might be helpful compared to that.
Actually, I will tell you, it's more helpful in the other parts with Artifactory because the amount of metadata that we have, it's impressive. And what other thing Artifactory provides you is its own query language. So with that query language, you are more productive in saying, how many of our projects at organization level in the different repositories, like because other thing that Artifactory does quite nicely is create as many repositories as you want, and with very compact footprint. So having new repositories, it's trivial. Having virtual repositories to consolidate different groups of repositories is super trivial for Artifactory. So we're very, very efficient on that. So for us, storing information or binaries or artifacts in the different repositories, it's very simple. And many of, depending on your CI/CD process and your CI/CD specification, how do you actually enrich that information? But most of our clients like start promoting their builds and start promoting their releases through the different repositories. And every single time that an organization, for example, Q&A, touches it, they enhance the metadata information. So for example, when we decide to upgrade a specific version of whatever very common dependency in our own products, Q&A test, like in this particular version of release XYZ, we only upgraded this particular dependency. And QA will say, well, this is what I found. This is actually impacting our performance in this and that way. And suddenly, because of all the other machinery that is behind Artifactory, we can say before other developers on other teams think about upgrading to that particular version, we can say, well, this particular version may not the best option for you because we know that it's impacted performance because of this team. So for me, the benefits is the how you have a single source of truth with Artifactory that enables a lot of information to be collected from security, performance, or how the organization is distributed, and then make it completely transparent to your organization. That's what I like. And I went, okay, yes.
So you're telling me when there is an issue, you give the options, right? Sort of options. Are you giving or restricted to the version you need to upgrade or similar libraries? For example, I have a library X has an issue with version 1. Are you telling that go and upgrade to version 2, or are you telling you have what X, Y, Z?
Well, you actually need to be very, very careful because most of the time to your teams, if there is a known issue with that specific version library, yes, you want to say, no, don't, I won't allow you. But if you are thinking about reproducible builds, for whatever reason, we cannot take that decision. What you can create is different mechanisms. Like if you request this specific version library for reproducible builds requirements, then it's okay. We will serve it to you. But if you are only requiring this particular library for a specific new project, no, unacceptable, no. And we will try to steer you away from that one and give you another version. But that's more on the organizational level. Artifactory is able, for example, for NPM packages, it's able to rewrite some of the paths. For example, if you're in your package JSON, you have a direct link to a GitHub repository, and you're resolving that way your dependency, what we can do is, after caching it, in a way with magic, use our resolution in our repository instead of pinging directly GitHub. That's also functionality that Artifactory can provide you. So in a way, yes, we are steering you away from a specific version. Yes.
I understand the version, but it means it has a bad history. Are you suggesting to go another library which gives the same function?
Artifactory won't do that. They won't do that. No. What we can do, and we have done, is in the metadata of the specific dependency, is creating a label saying, please, or
notifying that, try to avoid it.
Yes, if you must, but it's highly discouraged. At least, and when you are querying that, we can know that. And we can trigger something. For example, if you're trying to download a specific dependency with vulnerabilities, we can trigger an email or different kind of actions like that. If you're using something that it's discouraged, we can have a response for that.